are super excited today. This is the 4-7 podcast. I am RJ here with Michael. We are here today with Andrew Schwab from Project 86, among other things. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for joining. You are across the country from us. We were just talking. You're as far away as you can be from us in the same country. And we thank you for joining us. It's 10 o'clock our time. And so most of our listeners, who is our friends and probably children, are listening tonight. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. Mike, tell us a little bit more about our guest.
Andrew Schwab is probably the best vocalist I've ever heard. I'm not even kidding. Your vocal, I'm okay. I'm just going to geek out for a second. So there's probably, in my opinion, there's 3 amazing vocalists I truly love. You're definitely the top vocalist. Your vocals, they're just so raw and amazing. And I read in an interview, you never actually took vocal lessons. You just did it.
Well, that's not entirely true. In the context that I probably meant that answer, no, I didn't take any voice lessons to learn how to yell or sing or anything. I'm going to turn off my email here, guys, so I'm not getting alerts. Sorry about that.
No worries.
However, let's say, I'm going to say about 5 years into my music career,
sure,
I was having issues with losing my voice when I was touring. Yeah, and so we were signed to a major at the time, so we had some access both in the relationship sense and in the budget sense to some high-level voice coaching. And so I did go see a voice coach around the time of our 3rd album, just specifically for help to lose my voice less, basically. But to be honest, while I learned a lot about warming up my voice, it wasn't until I stopped going to voice lessons and just made the decision to learn the things I needed to learn on my own. And really, it just happened over time. Did I improve in the areas that I need to improve upon, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So let's bring this back a little bit. So
who are your other 2? Who are the other 2? I'm curious.
I would like to know too, but here's a question for you. So you grew up in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Correct? Yeah. So how did you get to California?
Let's see. I lived in northwestern Pennsylvania until high school age, pre-high school age.
Sure.
Moved in with my mom. My parents split when I was really young. My mom lived in Maryland. My dad still lives in northwestern Pennsylvania, along with some of my other relatives. And then my family, my mom, her husband, and my 2 younger brothers, and I moved to Southern California because my parents basically transferred jobs. Nothing too crazy or exciting. Moved to Southern California when I was 16, I believe, 15 or 16. Ended up in Orange County, and then ended up making friends with people who were playing music and in the music scene in college, basically.
Now, I was reading in an article that your very first album, rock album that you've ever listened to was Kill 'Em All by Metallica.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now, did that start the journey into
metal, not rock, metal?
Okay. Now, did that start the journey into your music career? Was it at that point you were like, man, I could be the next James Hetfield?
I don't think so. It was probably, I would say that the first album that made me want to at least begin thinking about being the guy on stage was License to Ill by the Beastie Boys. That was around 6th grade, I believe.
Really?
And it wasn't I want to be the Beastie Boys. It was just such a deep connection to their persona and the music that it inspired me in such a way that, like, I just wanted to be as close to whatever they were doing as I could be. Now, as time went on and I got a little older, I got became more and more into music. I would say I don't remember a point in time or an artist where I said I want to be on the stage, but it became more and more of a reality for me throughout junior high. And then I would say my freshman year of high school was when I actually started trying to make my own music.
Nice. Because I was also reading that your first album you ever owned was Queen's Another One Bites the Dust.
That was a 45 record.
Yeah, like seriously, like that's got Metallica.
That was purchased for me as a gift. Yeah.
Now, did your parents, were they into music? Is that how you kind of got into your musical taste?
Yeah. So my mom and my stepdad growing up were the big musical proponents, and my stepdad was actually a musician. And so I would say if it wasn't for being exposed to that world, I probably would never have thought that it was a possibility or a reality. But this is a funny piece of I don't know, trivia or a funny story. So when I moved in with my mom, they rented out one of the rooms in their house to the sound guy for my stepdad's band.
Nice.
And so he had a ton of gear there at the house, like literally across the hallway from me. So I would go knock on his door and say, "Can I borrow a microphone? Can I borrow that mixer? Can I borrow?" And I would just figure stuff out, by borrowing gear from my neighbor across the hall. Otherwise, if I didn't have access to that, I probably wouldn't have been able to make some really bad hip hop demos in ninth grade.
So with Project 86, how did that start? I know you've probably told this story 100 times before, but how did you get into it? What was the point of starting Project 86 for you?
So the year was 1994.
Sure.
And what lit the fire in me to do something that was heavier, harder, metal, rock, hardcore, whatever you want to call it, was I started going to shows. I had a bunch of friends who were involved in like the underground scene in Southern California. And I remember going to shows and thinking to myself, I want to do that. I want to do that. And I think I could do it well. And so I started networking within that scene to meet people. And it took me a couple of years to recruit the right guys lineup. And we had some lineup changes in the early days. But I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up listening to metal, anything that was a little bit more extreme in terms of emotion. And so I wanted to play heavy music. And I think to say that back then I had some sort of grandiose vision or goal in mind in terms of the band would probably be inaccurate. I didn't have a ton of goals in mind other than I just wanted to play, and I wanted to play music that I loved, and I wanted to play with guys who wanted to play the same kind of music and play shows and write songs. And I think if there was a goal in the beginning, it was just to write and record an album of our own material. That was kind of the short and long-term goal. And I don't think there was ever any thought or discussion beyond that.
Sure.
I think in the back of my mind was, if we can make music that I'm happy with, that we're happy with, that we're stoked on, that we feel is good, then maybe other people will like it too.
Well, it's funny because I was listening to, was it Billy Power? He used to be one of the people from Tooth and Nail. He has a podcast, and Ethan Luck was on it. And is it true? Ethan said that on the podcast. Ethan said Andrew would never admit this, but did you tell Ethan you wanted to start a Christian version of Rage Against the Machine or something like that?
Probably something to that effect. I mean, I loved Rage Against the Machine.
They were a great. That's the one band that broke up.
I loved that band back in the day, and they were definitely a huge influence on me personally. Zach De La Rocha's vocal. I wouldn't say his approach to writing lyrics lines up with mine. I would say I write from a different standpoint. I definitely don't write political lyrics. That's never been my thing. But as far as like the merger of like rock and rap and where we sat in history at that point in time, I would say they were definitely my biggest influence, at least in the very beginning. Now, this is a piece of trivia that I shared on my podcast. I actually did admit that Rage Against the Machine was a huge early influence, and I think you can hear it on our first record, especially on our first demo. But the biggest thing that I learned in the early days of Project 86 was, okay, everybody brings their influences to the table when you start the band. And because it was my band and they were such a huge influence for me, it couldn't help but sound like that in the very beginning.
Sure.
Well, it wasn't until we recorded a demo and I got a little bit of feedback and we received feedback from people that I realized, oh, wow, we do kind of sound like that. That the goal changed. Okay. And immediately it was, okay, we need to have our own sound. We can't sound like another band or a Christian version of this band or that band. So while Ethan was around in those early days, he wasn't around for the really, I would say that the intentional decision-making that went into Project 86 having its own sound, which is, I think, one of the things that's defined the band over the years. It's you know, I really wanted to have a unique voice and I really wanted the band to have a unique sound. And I think over the years, that's kind of been something that's attached to the name.
Absolutely.
So Ethan was trying to diss me on that, but you should tell him to say it to my face because I already addressed that. What?
Yeah,
so,
I gotta tell you,
I don't have any problems with him saying that.
The first two albums, I would say you just nailed it. Your voice and the sound, even today's album, they're different than we usually hear on the radio. The vocals were so different. I remember when one of the first pictures I saw of you, you had the beanie on, the Adidas shirt, rocking the Adidas shirt, and when I heard the self-titled album and the song "Run," I was instantly hooked on Project 86. And then I saw you guys at Soulfest in probably 97. Soulfest was over in New Hampshire. They still have it nowadays, but this is back in 97. You said you had the fro. You had like the huge.
That would have been 99.
99, okay.
Yeah.
You guys put on one amazing show. You guys absolutely fantastic. So let's talk about how you got signed. How did you get from the idea of starting a band to talking to Brendan Ebel and get onto Beck Records?
I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who that guy is. So
Brendan Ebel?
I'm really confused.
Brendan Ebel. Oh my God, I just peed my pants.
I like that you're mispronouncing his name.
How do you
stick with that?
How do you pronounce it?
Brandon Ebel.
Evil.
Rhymes with evil.
If you watched any of our podcasts, he doesn't get my name right most of the time. So,
That's okay.
And we're friends, so it works out.
That's cool.
We just let it go.
So, not a dramatic story. We were friends personally with a lot of the bands that were on that label. And in hindsight, hindsight's always 20/20. I think if we had toured a little while, we probably would have ended up signing to a different label. But because we had so many friends on that label, it really made the most sense. It was a very natural sort of introduction, and there were good words being put in for the band for Project 86 with Tooth and Nail Records because there were bands that were already successful in the label kind of pulling for us. So the funny story about that was there was no one on the Tooth and Nail staff that wanted to sign Project 86.
Really?
Well, yeah, because Project 86 was never a band that was meant to appeal to scene kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it was intentionally kind of more of, for lack of a better way to put it, a mainstream approach, right?
Okay.
So I think to the staff at Tooth and Nail, we didn't have enough cred. You know what I mean? We were dorky or whatever. Yeah. I don't say me. I was the one who was intentionally not buying into the scene of tooth and nail. And I think over the years, that was always not a point of contention, but that was the thing that made Project 86 unique in the history of Tooth and Nail. Is we found success doing a style of music or a sound or an approach that was a little bit counterintuitive to a lot of the bands that were on that label. And yet, especially on Drawing Black Lines, found some success inside of that scene, if that makes sense. So we almost set out to define, or to defy what sort of defined that scene, which was like a mentality, a scene mentality. And it still ended up working inside of that. But that's why I say in hindsight, maybe Tooth and Nail wasn't the best fit for us, only because the ethic, the mentality was a little bit different than a lot of the other bands that came out of that scene.
So early on, when you were touring, you're on Beck, you're on Tooth and Nail, but you're also touring with some really large bands and bands that are not Tooth and Nail. I mean, you were traveling with POD, even I think Linkin Park at some point. What was it like traveling with bands like that while being on maybe Beck or Tooth and Nail records? How was that for you?
So going into our second album, the band was licensed to Atlantic, which was always the goal of the band to not just play in the faith-based market, right? Or at least very early on, that became a goal, is that look, if we're going to go somewhere with this thing professionally, let's do it in a way that it appeals to a broader audience, not just people that necessarily personally agree with our worldview or our belief system. So going into, after recording our second album, really some new doors opened up in the mainstream world, I guess, if for lack of a better way to put it. There were a few labels that were interested in us. Atlantic was one of them. And we ended up, because of a pre-existing relationship between our previous label and Atlantic, that seemed to make the most sense, was to license the album, which wasn't necessarily our decision, but we ended up being on Atlantic in the mainstream, and then Tooth and Nail, BEC, on the Christian side of things. And so right when that happened, or shortly thereafter, we started getting more opportunities to tour with mainstream artists. And I do remember the tour with Linkin Park, and POD was the headlining act on that tour. And the funny thing was, Linkin Park was the opening act, and we were the second of 4 bands. So they were opening for us, technically.
Wow.
And it was they joined the tour right before their first album, Hybrid Theory, dropped. So they were still a relatively unknown band, but they were receiving a lot of airplay on the radio. So when their album dropped in the middle of that tour, they were selling a ton of records out the gate. By the end of the tour, I think they were the biggest band on the tour, or they were very fast becoming one of the bigger bands on the tour, or the biggest band on the tour. At any rate, I remember a couple of funny stories about the tour. I remember at one point after their album dropped, their manager contacted our manager basically saying, "Hey, we're bigger than Project 86. We need to be headlining." And our manager said, no, you guys agreed to be the opening slot, so you're the opening slot. But I remember watching their fan base grow from city to city every day. It was getting bigger and bigger, and we're like, shoot, these guys they're going to be huge. And they did. They ended up selling over 10 million copies of that record, probably way more than that. The other funny story was, I remember they didn't start that tour on the very first date. They jumped on a week or two into it. And so I remember when they showed up to the tour, their bus showed up to the tour. I think I woke up late one morning and rolled out of our bus, and I saw their bus sitting outside the venue, and I walked up to their bus, and the door opened to their bus, and the guy jumped off, and I immediately recognized him. He was actually one of I had a group of friends in high school that I was really close to. And he was one of the younger brothers of that small group of friends. And so I knew this guy really well and had spent a ton of time at his house over the years, and we all ran with the same circle in high school. And I looked at him and I said, "What are you doing here, man?" So I play bass for this band. And I was like, "No way." So it was really funny. We had a pre-existing relationship in high school, actually.
We have a Ben McCrae. I think you know Ben McCrae from Rhode Island. He says hello and what's up,
Ben?
Rob? So I have a question for you. Drawing Black Lines was an incredibly high energy album, and it's actually one of my favorite albums of all time. You got signed to it was fantastic, and you got signed to Atlantic. Were you surprised because you were in the whole brand new genre of a new metal scene? How was it being in that new metal scene with like Korn, Limp Bizkit, Head PE, Linkin Park? Did you expect the album to go farther than it did?
There's a lot to those questions. I think we were not anticipating the response that we received when we recorded that album. We didn't know what we had going into it. We were just having fun. There were 4 band members, and we all were just enjoying collaborating together, being a band together, like enjoying our time together, working with a producer that we really respected. Mm-hmm. We did that album very quickly. There wasn't a lot of overthinking. We just went in and enjoyed making heavy music, and the 4 guys that made that record were all on the same page creatively. We all wanted to do the same thing. We wanted to write a dark, but not negative, heavy record that would translate well to the live setting. And when we were finished mixing the record and we started showing it to people, we got a very strong response from everyone that we showed it to. And we started looking at one another going, wow, we did something really special here. This record's like, it's not just special to us, it's going to be special to other people. And so I think that was a little bit of a shock initially. And once we sort of realized what we had in the record, then it was like, okay, we need to be on the road. We need to be supporting this. You know, the expectations got bigger.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a moment in time where we looked at one another and said, well, we're a real band. We made a real record. We're good.
Yeah.
We should be out there doing this thing with all of the heavy hitters, you know, in heavy music. So yeah, nu metal was still on the front end of kind of becoming a thing, which was short-lived and went from being kind of cool to becoming very uncool. Thanks
to Fred Durst.
Thanks to Limp Bizkit and bands like that. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
So after that, you part ways with Atlantic at some point, and you head back to Tooth and Nail for the release of later albums like Songs to Burn Your Bridges By, and The Rest Will Follow. What was that transition like for you? Kind of balancing both, having Atlantic and Tooth and Nail and Beck, and now kind of taking a step back and going a little bit more full into Tooth and Nail.
Actually, before you answer that question, because there's something else besides that I need to know. So you released the follow-up album to Drawing Black Lines. It was a very different album. It was a concept album. And if I remember correctly, you personally were not, that's not the album you wanted to release. You wanted to release something that was more hard and more heavy, but the labels were pushing you for more of a poppier hard rock sound. What happened?
So there's a lot to that. And man, I've talked about this for so many years now, but the more distance I get from that era, the more perspective I get. Again, hindsight's 20/20, right?
Yeah.
So the long and short of it is this. So we had signed a 6-record deal initially with Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
And Drawing Black Lines really introduced us to a larger world. I think it was grossly underexposed. We didn't tour a lot on that album. We really didn't have any support from a real management company that believed in us or was pushing us. It was just a really strange thing. I think if it had been given the attention that it probably warranted, and we were on the road doing more than just a couple of tours, we probably would have sold 250,000 records or more. Ended up selling about half of that. So going into our third record, basically our team, which involved our attorney and our business people, managers, etc., basically said, you know, we would like to get you bought out of your deal with Tooth and Nail and make you exclusively on Atlantic, which eventually did happen. But the leverage in that situation from Atlantic was, we're going to buy you out of your deal with Tooth and Nail, but we need you to give us singles. We need you to give us big songs that are going to translate to radio and sell 1 million records, blah, blah, blah. So there was this pressure from the beginning after Drawing Black Lines to deliver a more commercially viable release. And POD, who was also on Atlantic, and I personally never wanted to sign to the same label as POD, just because we were a different band, but because we had toured with them and there was an association there, and we sort of came out of the same family of bands, or the same market, if you will. There was a template that they had created that we were being automatically plugged into. The problem was we're totally come from a different background, different, you know, it's just a different influence, different perspective on music, everything different. So you can't apply one band's experience to another and expect the same situation to occur, right? And so I didn't ever view Project 86 to be this like pop band or a pop rock band or whatever. I think we have always been at our strongest, or this entity has been at its strongest, when the music's at its darkest, at its most aggressive.
I agree.
And I think that was lost in writing Truthless Heroes, which was our third album. Basically, I was the only one in our entire family of people, band members and extended family of business people, who said, no, let's write another album in that vein of Drawing Black Lines. We had band members that were saying, well, we either need to, you know, go platinum, or, you know, the band needs to break up, kind of thing. That was the mentality, is, you know, let's give Atlantic Records what they want. Let's write a more commercially viable record. And if it doesn't work, well, we gave it a big shot. I mean, that was just totally the opposite of why I started this band. I wanted to do more of what we did on Drawing Black Lines, maybe just a little bit more evolved away from the nu metal thing. But we always existed on the fringes of nu metal anyways.
Yeah.
So what came out was Truthless Heroes. And I think the concept album was my way of controlling what I could control inside of it. It's like, okay, I'm losing control of kind of the direction of this thing. So let me just go deeper into this like story I want to tell, kind of thing. I think in hindsight, if we had just released Spy Hunter as the first track on Truthless Heroes, it would have been all good. But we recorded Spy Hunter, and for some reason it didn't make the album. I don't know whether that was my decision or someone else's, but it was an old hat, because we wrote that record basically, we wrote that song basically on the Drawing Black Lines album cycle after we released that album. And then we sort of forgot about that song. And because we were so focused on writing hits, I don't think we considered putting that song first on the record. But if I had to do over again, that would be track 1 on Truthless Heroes, our third release. And I think our core fan base would have responded really well to that. And probably if a little bit different of a song order, that would have made the album a little bit more aggressive. And then I think the story would have been a little bit different. But we left Atlantic. We were dropped from Atlantic after our third record because it didn't go platinum, you know, which was the goal. We sold far less than that.
So I'm glad that we kind of brought that up, because my question now makes a little bit more sense. So you're gone from Atlantic at this point. You're kind of backing into Tooth and Nail again. How did that make you feel? Is there a relief that you no longer have to kind of exist for somebody else and kind of do your own thing again, or was it disappointment? What was the feeling at that point?
It was a little of both. I mean, obviously you're disappointed when you're not on the major anymore, because there's still something exciting about being on a major label, you know, and being a part of that system. There's an air of legitimacy. There's exposure to, you know, bigger artists, etc. Coming back to Tooth and Nail, it was something that I didn't personally want to do. It was more of something that made sense from a logistical standpoint. And we, you know, I wanted to keep making records. So, hey, we had success previously on this label. You know, we sort of graduated, if you will, into something else and then came back to it. I think it was more just about the music, though, at the end of the day. I don't think the band is defined by what label we were on. We're more defined by the music that was being written. So I see that aspect of our career as, yeah, the labels at that time were somewhat responsible for creating marketing opportunities for the band, but they in no way defined what the band was at the time, if that makes sense. So there was a little bit of disappointment with leaving Atlantic, but there was also kind of a comfort factor with going back to where we had come from and getting back to your roots kind of thing. There were certain things about being a part of the major label system. Obviously, you know, the idea of playing the radio and commercial hit game that wasn't exactly where I wanted the band to be. That letting go of that was definitely not a disappointment. So it was a mixed bag, if that makes sense.
So going through all these things, the ups and the downs, and going to the secular label to the Christian label, how did that affect your faith? You know, did it have an effect on your faith? Did it bring you down, or did it make it stronger? Like, what was going on in your mind as you were kind of being kicked around by people saying, I want you to do this, but you have to do this? And it's like, give me a break.
Yeah, I think it's very easy, especially if you achieve any measure of success in really any entertainment field, to start getting bogged down by the business side of things, right? Mm-hmm. So none of us started playing music, and I didn't want to start a band to make money. But eventually you become an adult and you start going, okay, I need to be able to pay my bills and be a responsible human being. And not a child, you know, inside of it. So there is a business element that you have to be responsible with that starts coming into the foreground. And the more successful you become, the more of a team you assemble, the more everybody's getting a piece of the pie, blah, 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 blah. Nobody cares about that stuff if you're a music fan, but it's a reality of the music industry, just as the salary cap is a part of professional sports, you know?
Yeah.
So people tune in to watch an NFL game, not because they care about what so-and-so is making or what their contract situation is, blah, 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 but because they enjoy football, right? The music fan listens to a band not because of X, Y, Z with their business, but because they enjoy the music. But behind the scenes, it's a reality. So, yeah, I think the biggest challenge was the disillusionment that you begin to experience when you approach something from a wide-eyed perspective. You have an idealistic, childlike approach to why you're doing what you're doing. And then as it becomes more and more apparent that this is a business and I'm a part of that, that's where things get challenging. And I think for me, during that era of the band, that was the hardest thing that I dealt with. And there were days where I had a hard time sleeping, and, you know, I really went through a really dark season, a hard season where I'm like, where are you? Because I didn't really understand the things that were going on around us. Now, again, hindsight, was I taken care of? Was I provided for? You know, was God always there? Of course, man. But could I see it at that time? Not always. But, you know, I was the one who was getting distracted by all of these other cares, etc., in the business of it. But yeah, that's where a lot of artists tend to struggle, is when you start to achieve a measure of success, there's a lot of distractions and there's a lot of disillusionment that comes along, and how you respond to that kind of defines your character moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I have my own business, and it's a pretty successful business. And having your own business is kind of like having a band. There's the business aspect, there's the fun aspect, and then I'm sure there's definitely differences. But whenever you have levels of success, you get almost that feeling of I'm invincible.
Of course.
Nothing can bring me down. But then when you get brought down, it's like, well, God, why'd you let that happen?
Totally.
I feel like
And there's nothing more invincible feeling than standing on a stage in front of lots of people,
chanting your name,
or singing the lyrics that you wrote, or whatever. Like, that is an extremely powerful drug, and it can make you feel totally invincible. It's totally false, of course, but the feeling is real.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, there's a reason why God has me as a commercial photographer in the small state of Rhode Island, because if I ever had any bit of success, my head could not fit out that door, and I would be the biggest idiot to people, because I would just.
But that's a human condition thing. Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't realize. You see this all the time with the way that we obsess over celebrities, right?
Yes, that drives me nuts.
And I just watched that HBO documentary on Tiger Woods, kind of the unsolicited documentary on Tiger Woods the other day. And I'm thinking to myself the entire time I'm watching, especially the second part of it, I'm going, all he did was act like a human being inside of what he had been given and who he was shaped to be. And yet this guy who was set up to be more than he was, and then torn down when he made mistakes inside of that, and was just totally, vilified for the things that he did wrong. All he did was display in very vivid fashion the human condition. So how would you or I respond if we were Tiger Woods and had gone through the things that he went through, good and bad? Probably in similar fashion.
I actually agree with you, because whenever I see people complain about whatever, whether it be not getting politics, but I'm saying whether it be about politics or about art, artists, or anybody who fails, I say to myself, what the crap would you do in that situation? You have no idea, because
it's hard to remember that, though.
Absolutely. I agree.
For any of us. For me too, obviously.
Yeah. So you're at the point now, you're back on Tooth and Nail. But you also had a gap where you were not on Tooth and Nail. You wanted to go the independent route, because you released your fourth album independently and then brought it back onto Tooth and Nail. Why did you guys want to go that independent route first for a while?
I think we were just fed up with dealing with the whole record label everything, because it was difficult from, I would say, about 2000 to 2003. Yeah, dealing with all of the internal politics of the different record labels, etc. So yeah, we recorded the album independently and then started shopping it around. I didn't anticipate re-signing to Tooth and Nail at all. In fact, I wanted to avoid it, but the various business people that we were working with at the time was like, this is probably going to be the smartest move for you guys from just a career standpoint. And so that's why we made that decision. So the question was, though, after that, or did I answer your question?
No, I think you answered it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had a question too. I actually came into Project 86 a little later than Mike did. There were these group of albums, and it's funny because everybody we've had on this podcast has appeared on these albums was the X albums, the Christian rock X albums that came out every year. And you guys were on X 2005 with the Spy Hunter. And so that was the first time I'd heard you guys. You were alongside some of my, bands, Seventh Day Summer, Under Oath, Cutlass, Sanctus Real. Just a weird combination of bands. KJ52, John Rubin was on there. And then to hear the Spy Hunter on there, it just kind of like blew me away. Because again, you have all these bands like Cutlass on there, which I love, but it's not Project 86 for sure. And so I start hearing these songs. I got into spoken that way too, which was a whole nother amazing, like really hard band. I say that because I came in a little later. I went back, listened to the stuff, and you guys released a couple of albums around this time. We just talked about Songs to Burn Your Bridges By, and then The Rest Will Follow comes out. There was a little bit of a change there too. You guys even created, I think, a DVD about the making of that. And people have said that it kind of marked a change for you guys. One of the things that I had read was that you guys kind of felt humbled by your past experiences, and there was a bit of a change. Can you tell me about the difference there with And the Rest Will Follow? What was it like making that album?
I think sonically, album 5, you really start when you make that many albums, and we've made 10. You really need to start reinventing creatively. You can't keep writing the same types of songs over and over and over again. And so one of the things that I think made it possible for the band to have longevity is you've got a pretty big range in terms of emotion and sonics and diversity between the different types of songs that developed over time. And I think that was the first time we really started pushing the boundaries on writing. We had like more mellow songs or more melodic songs, and then your heavier songs, your faster songs, or so blah blah. We started really pushing the boundaries on that. I also tried to start diversifying what I was doing vocally, pushing myself to sing more rather than just yelling on every single song. And I think that was the first album where I started coming into that vocally. The other thing that started happening, and really it started happening after Drawing Black Lines, our second record, is that certain guys in the band just didn't want to make as heavy a music anymore. I've always been a pretty big heavy music guy. I want to go heavier and darker on every album, but you had guys in the band that were pulling in different directions, and so you end up meeting in the middle in terms of where the sound goes. And so there were greater and greater degrees of compromise happening, especially on my end. You get into album 5, album 6, that type of thing.
I have someone who has a question. Here we go here. Rob Canavan, who's I know this guy personally. He loves Project 6. He says, did the dark season come out in your songwriting?
Yeah, inevitably. Especially with the lyrics. I think Truthless Heroes is, in some senses, kind of a tragic take on experience. I just was coming from a little bit more of an uncertain place. There's a lot of certainty on Drawing Black Lines and on the first record. And I would say that Truthless Heroes is like that transformation from childhood to adulthood, where it's like you think you know everything and then you realize you don't. And so there's a lot of uncertainty on Truthless Heroes, the third record.
See, with me, I thought I knew everything, and then I had a kid, and I'm like, oh crap, I know nothing.
Yeah. The further I go, the more I realize I don't know anything.
Hey, Ben McCrae says Stein themes will always be the pretending, whatever that word is, Project 86 track.
The what?
I don't even know what that word is. Ultimate Project 86 track. You got a typo in there. Stein's theme will always be the ultimate Project 86 track from Ben McCrae.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. That's one of my favorite all-time tracks.
So honestly, we've only gone through 5 or 6 albums. You have plenty more to talk about after that, but we are coming up on the end here. We don't want to keep you all night. But what are you doing recently? How's your year been? I know that the pandemic has hit everybody pretty hard, but what have you been up to lately? And is there anything coming up down the bend that you want to talk about?
We just celebrated the 20-year anniversary of our second album, Drawing Black Lines, which, man, I'm old. But we did a live stream performance, and it really was an event. And we did this in Nashville. And we did 2 nights of performance. We did one night that was more of a VIP, unplugged performance, and then the second night we really went all out with production, and I was really happy with how the whole thing turned out, although it almost killed me. It was so much work, and everybody involved with that thing worked so hard and gave their best effort. It was so much fun, man. I'm hoping that we have another opportunity soon, and we're working on this to do another live stream revolving around anniversary type things. I'll leave it at that because we haven't announced anything yet. As far as working on new music, that has been happening for some time, and we'll have some announcements regarding that as well soon. Once the pandemic hit, it really just turned everything on its head, and so for me, for 6 months or more, it was like, okay, when is this going to end so we can get back to doing stuff? And then it's, oh, this isn't going to end for a while, so let's make some alternate plans, and then you have to set it up, etc. So,
well, I'm really glad that you guys are continuing to do things. The live stream was a huge success from what I've been reading, and we even have some people that are listening now that supported the live stream, so that was really cool. A lot of bands that I'm really into are doing the live stream thing, and I love it. Emery just did
was really
yesterday. Fun. It looked really cool. I'm really glad that you guys are still thriving. It's been, what is it? 96, 06, 16, 25 years.
25 years.
25 years. So you guys are still around doing your thing.
Started the band when I was 8.
But how was it? Josiah and Joey from Disciples speak very highly of you, by the way. We had them on the
that's good.
podcast a couple days ago. Panic Room, fantastic,
nice,
by the way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anything to do with
You had everything to do with that song. Fantastic.
That's their song. I was lucky enough that they asked me.
Well, your vocals really made that song just shine. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for taking your time to be with us here today.
Of course,
hopefully in the future, if you're still bored and want to hang with us, we can finish a little bit more.
Never bored. And this isn't boring.
Oh no, we're not boring. We're
what? One of my isms. Okay, the only type of people that use the word bored are boring people.
RJ's boring.
I have 2 podcasts. I think that makes me bored, but we'll see.
You're not bored or boring. You guys are great.
Well, we appreciate you coming out. We're going to end the live part of our broadcast, so if you don't mind just hanging on a few more seconds. But thank you guys at home for joining us for this very special live episode of the 4-7 podcast. I'm RJ, this is Mike, and this is Andrew from Project 86. But thank you again, and you have a good night.
Thanks for having me, guys.